God's will could be broken down into two groups or two classifications. And what are those classifications? Well, find out in the next few minutes. Hello, my name is OJ Tokes. Welcome to part 3 of how to find God's will for your life. I mentioned that we can view God's will in two classifications or two groups. And I think some of the challenges that we face with regard to finding God's will is because we confuse both groups or both classifications. Of course, if you have made considerable effort in trying to find the will of God for your life by reading books and listening to audio CDs or doing research online, I'm sure you see a lot of material addressing God's purpose or will for our lives. And lots of good books out there, lots of great information out there. All the same, I believe what I'll be sharing will only reinforce some of the things you know or clarify some things you might not even know. Okay? So, God's will for our lives can be seen into two groups. God has a generic will and He has a specific will. God has a generic will and He has a specific will. And I think the problem is when someone talks about the purpose of God for our lives, they're either talking about the generic. And I believe that more often than not, when someone is asking the question, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? They're really asking the specific. They're asking about the specific. The difference between the generic and specific is this. Generic is derived from the Latin word genere, which means in general. I'm sure you're familiar with the word generic. Okay, so God's generic will is the same for everybody. It's God's will in general. Okay, so God's generic will is God's will in general. God's specific will is God's will that is specific to an individual, is different for everybody. God's generic will is the same for everybody. God's specific will is different for everybody. So what happens is somebody's telling you about the will of God and you keep hearing the generic stuff. Well, it's the will of God for you to pray. Generic. It's the will of God for you to go to church. Generic. It's the will of God for you to be kind. Generic. It's the will of God for you to worship. Generic. It's the will of God for you to be a pilot. Specific. That's for a person, not for everybody. You see where I'm going with this? So God has a generic will and He has a specific will. God's generic will is the same for everybody. God's specific will is different for everybody. God's generic will deals with your character. God's specific will deals with your works. God's generic will deals with who you are. God's specific will deals with what you do. God's generic will is timeless. God's specific will is time specific. In other words, God's generic will, you can start today. You don't have to wait for no time. You don't have to wait for something to happen or an angel to show up or God to show up to tell you that you need to do X, Y, and Z. You can start today. God's specific will is for a specific time. So, what are some examples of God's generic will? We'll discuss more about this next week.